The top three most important things to our happiness. Number one is our mental health. Number two is our home. Number three is our physical health. And I argue that number one and number two, our mental health and our interior environment, right, our home, are directly connected to one another and are reflections of one another. And that doesn't mean if your house looks perfect inside that your mental health is great, right? It's not a specific correlation like that. It's more a matter of, do you get to show up in your own home as yourself? Do you feel like you get to take up space in your own home? Does it feel authentically connected to who you are and how you want to show up in the world? Is it supporting you rather than you supporting it?
You are now listening to the podcast where authors inspire listeners to become authors, the Going North Podcast. I'm your host, certified self-leadership trainer, best-selling author, and book enthusiast, DomBrightmon. And you're going to be listening to a different author that will inspire you to join the business of immortality, known as authorship. Now let the fun begin. Today's episode is sponsored by book number 2 from DomBrightmon, Stay the Course, The Elite Performer's 7 Secret Keys to Sustainable Success. It is the field guide to help unleash the elite performer that is inside of you. Cop it today on Amazon.com or heading over to DomBrightmon.com and snag it in book, ebook, and audiobook, so that way you can take it on the go and get yourself on the go to your northbound success. And today on the Highlight Reel Builder for Authors, known as the Going North Podcast, we got another super special, awesome human for you today, courtesy of probably one of the best websites on the internet today, known as podmatch.com, the wonderful site where podcast guests get to connect with podcast hosts. And if they're cool, they're freaking in. And today's guest is cool with the 10 cucumbers indeed, because we got a survivor and a thriver in today's podcast, baby. That's right, indeed, a survivor and a thriver who's put pen to paper, joined the business of immortality to explore another side of her that she didn't notice she had. And on top of that, she's also a fellow keynote speaker as well. And to make it even better and not butter, she's a life designer, and she is the lead designer at her own wonderful company called Concinnate. Indeed, that's right, indeed. I added the indeed. There's no consonate indeed. It's just consonate, y'all. And so let's give it up for the fabulous SNF. We're not talking about San Francisco, but we're talking about the wonderful, sensational, and fabulous, the one and only Shana Francesca. How you doing today, Shana?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Woohoo! It's great having you indeed. That's right,
Yeah.
indeed. That's right, indeed. Where the deed is in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. So, my goodness, since you've been on a boatload of these podcasts, interviews, there's probably been all sorts of stuff that I probably forgot to unpack, since introductions aren't allowed to be 72 days, 105 years long, and I probably only covered maybe 2 days of content. So, mind filling in any cavities I may have missed about you, Shana?
Yeah, so I am, like you said, I'm a life designer. My work focuses on intentional leadership and living. Underneath all of that intentionality, the work around intentionality, I am also an interior designer. So that's my background, training, and the recognition that our internal environment, both inside of ourselves and inside of our home, are kind of reflections of one another and our beliefs about ourselves. And our home is a great practice place for our intentional living and leadership in general. So that's the connection point between those things, is who we are inside, who we are personally is who we are professionally, right? And so we've got to do the work to practice being intentional in our personal lives so we can show it, so it shows up in our professional lives.
She must be a jewelry store manager on the side, because she's bringing gems already, indeed. That's right, indeed. That's right, indeed. The magical gems. Because, hey, it's really one life at the end of the day. The personal and professional, they're always going to seep into each other, whether we like it or not, indeed. So, my goodness, what got you into interior design and getting a bachelor's degree in it, no less?
Yeah. Yeah, so to be an interior designer, most people don't know this, but to be a professional interior designer, you need a Bachelor of Science in interior design from an accredited university, or you need to be mentored underneath a interior designer for like 4 or 6 years or something like that. It's a long time, yeah. So it's a term that's thrown around by a lot of people, but it actually does mean something.
That's what I'm talking about, indeed. And funny enough, it's like listening to some of your past content, it's like you're branching off into wonderful leadership development and
Yeah.
I guess basically life coaching through your interior design. So what was like the spark, the catalyst that helped you really connect those two things together? Because most folks would be like, interior design, oh, it's coming pretty up the house, right?
Yeah. Well, because that's what they've been taught that it is, because most of us haven't been taught the psychological connection to interior space, right? And there's a study that came out in 2019 that made it very clear that the top three most important things to our happiness, number one is our mental health, number two is our home, number three is our physical health. And I argue that number one and number two, our mental health and our interior environment, right, our home, are directly connected to one another and are reflections of one another. And that doesn't mean if your house looks perfect inside that your mental health is great, right? It's not a specific correlation like that. It's more a matter of, do you get to show up in your own home as yourself? Do you feel like you get to take up space in your own home? Does it feel authentically connected to who you are and how you want to show up in the world? Is it supporting you rather than you supporting it? Do you have systems in place that really take care of who you are? Do you feel like it has to be perfect for other people in case they show up? Or is it perfectly set up for what you need? Those are a lot of questions I sat down and have asked my clients over the years. And it became a matter of sitting down and saying, so who do you want to be in the world? How do you want to be able to show up inside of your own home? What way do you want your home to help facilitate you building community and relationships around yourself and supporting your dreams, right? And then how do we craft an environment that supports that, that sets the stage for that? Right? Literally sets the stage for that. In the way that when you go to a Broadway play or you go to any play, the stage sets the tone. It gives background. It supports what the actors are doing, what they're bringing forward, right? In that same way, your home should be that way, and not in a performative way, but in a supportive role, right? It becomes a role, a character. It sets culture. It sets tone for your life. And so that's the understanding that is missing, I think, for most people because what they see is imagery on social media in magazines. Back in the day it was magazines before social media, like all of these things that were telling you, okay, this is what's popular now, and this is how your home should look now if you want to be cool or you want to. But what if none of that matters? What if none of that matters? And what if your home has to be a beautiful reflection of who you know yourself to be and how you want to be able to show up in the world? Because it is the very last thing you see every day when you are about to close your eyes and go to sleep. And it's the first thing you see every morning is not just your home, but your bedroom, right? And what if you crafted those spaces to be a beautiful vision board for your life, right? In having these conversations with clients, I started to recognize, and many of my clients are judges, lawyers, heads of medical departments at very prestigious hospitals, business owners, entrepreneur, all these different types of people. And we would get into these very deep conversations and we would be having, hours of conversations around all of these things and then who they were as a leader and how they were connecting with their people and it just became this thing where I saw that the conversation kept leading to the same place, is who they were as a person, how they wanted to show up professionally, how they wanted to show up as a leader, how they wanted to show up for themselves and the people in their life. And it became something, where it connected back to how I grew up, where I grew up in environments where I grew up in an evangelical Christian cult and in an abusive household. And I saw very intentional leadership, but it was very intentionally harmful, right? And I saw my physical environment and knew my physical environment to be one I was not safe in, and knew the intellectual impact that had on me, the way that I could not take up space in the world, the way it deprived me of my humanity, the way it deprived me of my psychological safety. And so it was something that I all of a sudden started to see that all of these things are connected because it's all connected to us and who we are, right? And that our home becomes the practice ground for how we want to show up in the world. It should be that safe space where we can practice those things and we can we can practice being in relationship with people and stretch our wings and grow and learn and change and thrive, right? And so, yeah, it just became this place where I was like, all of these things are absolutely connected. And when I dive into these conversations, I saw how it changed how people were leading, right? And then I started doing group coaching, and I did that for 2.5 years. I took a year break and now I'm back to it. But I worked with over 100 people in that 2.5 years where, I was working with everyone from entrepreneurs who are like 25 all the way up to well-established business owners in their 50s. And seeing how it changed the way that they were able to show up for themselves and their people, I was like, there's something here, and I think for a long time I wasn't willing to give myself permission to be anything other than an interior designer. And as soon as I stepped into that, things started shifting and changing significantly.
That's right, indeed. Those significant changes, indeed. That's right, indeed. That's right, indeed. So, my goodness, like, there's like so much to unpack there, especially, I
Yeah.
guess, like, of course, the evangelical Christian cult, because, like, if you say those two, well, the first two words together, be like, evangelical Christians, like, that's a cult. No, that's freaking America, baby. But now when you think about it deeper, and I guess certain parts of the country, it can be kind of cultish, and especially with some of the things that you went through growing up in that. I'm
Yeah.
like, my goodness.
When leadership isn't held accountable, when they're actively consistently doing harm, when they are not reporting things to the authorities that are required to be reported, all of these things start to slip very quickly into a cult environment. And then, you have it encompassing people's entire lives, right? For me, I went to school there, I went to church there, we went to church 3 times a week, right? So I was at the school slash church Monday through Friday, right? And then I was there twice on Sunday and Wednesday nights and Thursday nights. And, so your entire life becomes this organization. And at that point, when there is no separation, right, is when between ideology and your everyday life, that's when it slips into a cult environment for me.
Yeah, definitely, definitely indeed. Because
Yeah.
some folks just live for certain parts of the certain parts of the world and certain activities, and it can
Yeah.
really take up your whole life, especially from the volunteer aspect, where sometimes you may feel like you're in quicksand. It's like you can't
Yeah.
freaking get out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think it's, important to talk about those things. And sure, it may not have felt that way for some other people who weren't as deeply involved. But yeah, it was that for me. And again, growing up in that environment and seeing intentionally harmful leadership, or leadership that wasn't being intentionally accountable, leadership that was being held in a godlike position, leadership that was doing harm, whether they were intending to do that or not, right? And they were consistently withholding resources from people while hoarding their own wealth. When you see all of these things start to happen, it becomes, for me, it became something I'm passionate about, having conversations around how do we hold ourselves accountable in our lives? How do we understand the places in our life where we're a leader, right? And where people are looking to us, and recognize that we're all leaders and that accountability is important for every single one of us. And how do we practice these things, right? So having these deeper conversations around intentional living and leadership, it just kept coming back to this place. And every time I lead one of my workshops, or I give a talk around intentional leadership, the number of people who come up to me, or after someone listens to a podcast, even, I've had people send me emails afterwards that say, what we talked about, the way I talked about it, changed their entire life, changed their view and their perspective about significant things in their life. And I'm like, I couldn't ignore it anymore, right? So I had to step into it, right? Because I knew it to be a powerful conversation, and I just gave myself permission because there was no one else to give it to me, right?
Heck yeah, indeed. It's just like as you were talking too, like of course the religious cult piece, but also just the fact that the way you speak about leadership and how interior design actually goes with it. Like, do you
Yeah.
think there's gonna be a book in you down the road that covers
Oh,
that
for sure.
topic?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's what I'm working on now. Unfortunately, to go the traditional publishing route now, you kind of need significant social media following. So I'm actively building my LinkedIn and my TikTok. Those are the two I'm most focused on because they feel the most genuinely connected to who I am and beneficial for what I talk about. So I'm actively building those audiences. By the way, I'm Shana Francesca on both. If you're on those platforms, would love to have you engage with me. But building that so that I can write a book and then I can, I could self-publish again, sure, but I'd really love the opportunity to go the traditional publishing route. You don't make any money with the traditional publishing route, not really, not unless you're a real big name, but you can capitalize on that marketing, which is what I'm hoping to do.
Yeah, because this working title just keeps popping in my head like sacred spaces, intentional leadership principles, learn from interior design or something like that. It's
Yeah, yeah,
like that's
yeah,
the vibe I'm getting there. It's
yeah,
not your everyday thing because you hear leadership every day, especially if you're like trying to advance your career and stuff. But it's like I
yeah,
never would like equate the two together like that. And I guess resilience is probably going to be a chapter in there, considering all that you've been through and
yeah,
being able to transmute all that pain. Because sadly, if I'm not mistaken, like with your past, of course, being in cult, they force you to do things like having a chastity vow and then sadly being molested 3 years later by the same person who forced you to take the vow. It's like, what the heck, man?
yeah. Yeah, so for the listeners, background is I was groomed by my own father, who is a licensed minister, although was not a pastor of a church at the time and is still not. But he forced me to take a chastity pledge at the age of 12 in front of our 2,000 person church, which was a violation already for me because I wanted to do it privately and not in front of 2,000 people because I had been, and this is a trigger warning. Sorry, I didn't say it before now, but take care and maybe mute this for the next moment or two if you are triggered or working through your own issues around sexual assault and abuse. But I had been raped at the age of 3.5 by my babysitter's son. And so technically, according to the rules of the church, I was actually not a virgin. So it felt like a violation for me to be required to then declare my purity in front of a church, knowing that that had been stolen from me, that purity had been stolen from me. Although I don't believe in virginity anymore, not in any way, shape, or form. It's just a means of controlling people with uteruses bodies. But you know, being forced to take that pledge and then being groomed by my father, and then him sexually assaulting me, that was a really huge blow. But I say this, in hindsight, it really feels like it was the thing that it broke me, right? It broke me,
Mm.
but it also, because it broke me, it made space, that pain, that anger, that it made space for me to question everything I was taught because I began to significantly question the person who was forcing me to believe it, right? Or to recognize that I was being programmed to believe something that didn't feel in alignment with who I am, right? And so, it made space for me to be who I am now, right? That pain, that fracture, that breaking, it didn't need to happen, right? And all the pain that came before it didn't need to happen. And that fracturing wouldn't have been necessary if all of the trauma before it hadn't been in place, right? So I'm not saying I am who I am because of trauma. I'm not, because I truly believe that trauma separates us from who we are. I think that challenges strengthen us and cause us to grow, but trauma and challenges are not the same, right? Trauma is like a veil that keeps being dropped in front of your face. Every trauma just separates you from who you want to be, who you wish you could be, because there's no sense of real safety to be who you are, right? But yeah, that moment fractured a lot of things for me, and is ends up kind of being why I wrote my nonfiction book under the pen name Maeve Marin. The book's called Under My Skin, but it became this form of like therapy for me to be able to write a story and me to be able to decide the ending, right? To establish who the characters were and how I wanted them to be able to show up in the world and the growing and the learning that I wanted them to be able to do through the story. and it was a deeply therapeutic thing, and I'm very proud of it. I self-published it. You know, I wrote it, I edited it, I formatted it, I designed the book cover. The book cover is gorgeous. I bought the photo from this amazing artist in the Ukraine. But ultimately, I never planned to write a romance novel, never. And then I just wrote it, and it became this, this path, this avenue, another part of my healing journey.
Ah, beautiful indeed, beautiful indeed. And so sorry about what happened that to you when you were 3.5. Like I knew it was deep. I didn't know it was that deep of
Yeah,
what happened. I know it went
yeah.
that far back. That's definitely rough. So my goodness. So with the healing journey, of course, you writing this novel being a part of it. Was there anything else that was part of it that helped you to really get back onto that road to healing and recovery from all of that?
I think it was also a really good practice ground for me to see what it was like to write a book, right? Because the next book is likely to be very personal, likely to be one that involves part of my story, and being able to like share that as part of a published book that anyone can read at any time. Like, yeah, it's interesting because yeah, I've told my story in one form or another on 90 podcasts now, and it's you know, bleeds into most of the conversations I have around how, what I do, and why I'm so intentional around, and creating intentional leadership and living in that conversation. But going to that personal place, like it's like I needed to like test the water. I needed to write a book before I write the next book, right? I needed to see what that felt like. And it's like 60 to 70,000 words. And most personal development books, or like those types of books, aren't that many words, right? They're like usually like 40 or 50,000. So to write it and write that many words, and it come out of me so quickly. I wrote it in 5 weeks. It took like 3 months to edit though, and format and all of that shenanigans, because that's like the most important part. Like that's like the most important part anyway. Um, because that's when it really all comes together. But I needed that as a practice ground. I needed to give myself permission to do something nonfiction first, or sorry, fiction first before I do something nonfiction. Yeah,
Uh, okay.
yeah,
Interesting indeed. Definitely interesting indeed. Because, like, sometimes folks will see it in reverse as, man, like, I might want to write the nonfiction book first because it might be easier, but hey, different strokes for different folks indeed,
yeah,
especially since
yeah.
it helps you to heal.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Fiction is one of the things that we can work through different concepts, through fictional characters, and it makes it easier for us to process our own growth, our own change, or to recognize different perspectives in the world, and for us to ease into those, new concepts that challenge our ways of thinking, our ways of being. So yeah,
That's what I'm talking about indeed. That's what I'm
yeah.
talking about indeed. So my goodness, so when it comes to putting this book together, the first ever book, and congratulations for getting it out and joining the business of immortality. That's right indeed. The first of many more books to come. So what was the process like of putting it together? Was any of your salsa dancing teaching days coming into play here as some of the
Yeah,
inspiration for it?
yeah. So there was a lot of inspiration in the characters from my own life to begin with, like at the start. But honestly, the characters, and this sounds nuts, but the characters took on a life of their own once I established who they were and that they were not me, right? Like once you establish who a character is, they become a person unto themselves. They're wholly and completely separate from you as a writer. And yet they are an extension of you because they're coming from your brain, right? So like there's two truths at the same time. The process was like it took a little while for me to feel out the characters, for them to tell me who they were, for me to recognize how I wanted them to show up in the story, and to let that take its own form and shape, and to push through that. But ultimately, once I established the characters, they just flowed out of me. I mean, sometimes I would write 10,000 words in a day. Like one weekend I wrote like 23,000 words between Friday and Sunday night. My hands hurt really bad after those days, really bad. Like I said, I didn't know what to expect it to be, but I've been writing since I was a kid. writing was one of my safe places, because I could say what I needed to say, and no one had I didn't have to show it to anyone. No one got an opinion about it. No one had a right to tell me I was wrong. And so I think my brain was just deeply excited about writing something in a new way and being able to express myself in a new way. And it felt so familiar. I mean, I have journals from the time that I was like 6, 7, from the time I started being able to write. I mean, my handwriting was terrible and I can't understand half of what I wrote. But, I have journals from even back then. So someday the plan is to hopefully be able to write a memoir, and to share my story in a really beautiful, deep way for, hopefully to help inspire people and to help change the world so that we recognize that, like, what healing looks like and how we can move through it and all of that. And anyway, but yeah, I don't know. I didn't know what it was going to be like to write a book. I hadn't even contemplated it. I hadn't even thought about it as far as a not like as a fiction book. I'd only ever thought about in the context of nonfiction because I thought that's where I would start. But I don't know. If anybody's trying to write a nonfiction book and you're stalled out, maybe try to go the fiction route first. I don't know. It worked out for me. Just to know that I could do, even if you never share it with anyone, even if you never publish it, just see, do it for fun, right? Like there's no pressure in that. I didn't even know I was going to publish it. I just started writing it, and I was like, this might be something, and it might not be anything. And somewhere halfway through, I was like, I think I'm going to write this whole thing. I think it is going to be a thing, and I think I'm going to publish it, right? But there was no pressure on myself. I think the idea of writing a nonfiction story, or nonfiction book, there was a lot more pressure in that, right? Because I'm sharing my direct ideas, I'm sharing myself, and then people are going to have opinions about that, and that feels incredibly personal, right? Like way more personal.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, indeed. That's what I'm talking about, indeed. So, my goodness, and hey, doesn't even sound crazy at all. I've talked to quite a few fiction novelists, indeed, and a lot
Mm,
of them do say when they write their books, especially those who like to write at the seat of their pants, it's like, hey, these characters, they take lives of their own,
yeah,
they become their
they do.
own people. They're,
They are their
it's,
own people. Yeah, they tell you what they want to say. They absolutely are talking inside of your head. And maybe that's because as a kid, I spent a lot of time talking to myself in the mirror because, when you grow up in an abusive household, you cannot share what's going on inside of your home with other people. That's dangerous, right? It's dangerous because, especially if your abuser finds out, because somebody comes back to them and says, hey, you know what your daughter's been saying? Is that true? Because other adults don't recognize, at least back then, I think now it would be different. But back then, people would assume that you were just being dramatic as a kid. They didn't assume they needed to protect you, right? They didn't assume what you were saying was the truth. And so they would go to your parents, the people who are abusing you, and say, you know what she's been saying, right? And so writing things down or talking to yourself becomes the only safe way to process because your environment is not safe. You're not safe with the people you live with, right? And so your story is not safe with the world.
That's what I'm talking about indeed. That's right. Shana's dropping some gems today, y'all. That's right indeed. If you feel like a story ain't safe for the world yet, just go ahead and go the fiction route. Change some names, change some faces, make up some
Yeah.
characters, then they take a life of their own, and then you will have them go across the desert like a camel. That's right indeed. And your main character will wear a turban. And Shannon probably hasn't even worn a turban yet, to my knowledge. I have no idea. So you never know that they could have a turban. That's right indeed. You never know. Never know indeed. Because hey, sometimes writer's block be a thing. It's like, trying to
Yeah.
write this book for years, give them the raw truth. It's like, hey, give them the raw truth covered in some random icing via fiction novels.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's right indeed. That's right indeed. So my goodness, so since you've been promoting some good stuff and you've been sharing your story, that's been, I'm sure, giving other folks out there confidence to share their stories and help folks
Yeah.
realize, hey, I'm not alone here. I too grew up in a cult, sadly, looking back at all the craziness that was going on. Is there a question that you wish folks would ask you more often when you're on these podcasts?
I don't know if there's a question. I mean, I go into every conversation knowing that the host knows their audience and knows what the audience, what they're interested in hearing about and how my story will relate to them. So I don't go in expecting anybody to ask me any specific question. I go in with the intention that, I'm meeting the needs of the audience and what their expectations are for the conversation. So no, I don't think there's anything I wish somebody would ask me. However, I do love to share that I think that curiosity can and will change the world. When we get to a place where we recognize we don't know and we open ourselves up to listen to and believe the lived experiences of the people around us, and when we lean into that, I know that it changes people's perspective and that changes the world, right? It becomes an education all to itself because we as human beings learn best through metaphor, right? Which is a storytelling, which that becomes very powerful when it's someone's actual lived experience. So, I just come back to the fact that curiosity can and will change the world, and we've got to practice. Anything we want to be great at, we have to practice, and that includes being curious.
So I'm talking about cats got 9 lives for a reason because they live a long time because of curiosity.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
right, indeed. They don't get killed. They just say meow. That's all.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So, my goodness. So, what's the greatest gift you received thus far from your curiosity?
Um, Starting my own business and being able to do what I'm doing now, to be able to continually learn and be able to process and share that learning with the world in the different platforms and places where people give me a microphone.
There we go. Passing the mic like folks are passing blunts. You love to see it. So, indeed, sharing a story. Y'all love to see it, indeed. Because, hey, starting that business, good stuff, indeed. So, any words of encouragement for those who are looking to start a business of their own and keep it afloat, especially with you having to do all that you did to be an
Yeah.
interior designer, no less?
Yeah. Form a community of support around yourself. Start networking before you officially take any leap. Like, start networking now. Even if you're not sure if you're going to start a business for sure or what, start networking. Build a group of people around you. Build access to conversations because you're going to come to the edge of your own learning pretty quickly in entrepreneurship, right? You're going to need the life experience, the lived experience of a variety of different people at different places within their businesses to be able to support you, to move in that journey with you. Otherwise, you're going to burn out quickly or you're just going to quit. And that's not necessary. If you build community around yourself, recognize that you can't and don't need to do it on your own. You'll be much more successful and move through things a lot quicker. You'll move through struggle and failure because you'll have relationships with people that you can say, hey, I just failed. I fell flat on my face. I need help. Am I missing something? What am I not seeing? And be able to have mentors and help around you to be able to help you move through that.
Solid tips indeed. That's right, indeed. Network. That's right, indeed. Dig that well before you're thirsty, as the good old book would say. That's right, indeed. At
Yeah.
least the book title would say that. That's right, indeed. Because you never know. Could use that help down the road. That's right, indeed. Especially when you need some opportunity down the line. Indeed. So, my goodness, so with you being a fabulous entrepreneur, still in business, has there been a major setback in business besides COVID that actually set you up for major success?
I wouldn't say a setback. I think the thing that you have to look at is there's going to be setbacks all the time. There's going to be the moments that you get to the edge of your learning, the edge of your understanding, a moment that requires your growth. I don't necessarily look at them as setbacks as much as it's just a moment to pivot, to grow, to learn, to change. And, if you're really dedicated to building a business, recognizing that like what you thought you were going to build and what you actually build are most likely going to be two different things, right? Because when you set out on that journey, you're going to start to learn a lot of things. You're going to understand a lot of things. You're going to bump up against other people's expectations and client expectations and whether or not you actually want to meet those expectations, if that's really what you intended or what you wanted, if it really feels the way you thought it was going to feel. There's all these things that come up that you have to work through. So yeah, I don't look at them as setbacks. I mean, at some point I realized I didn't want to just build an interior design firm, that I was building something much larger. And so I rebranded, right? And I took the opportunity to do that early. I recognized like, hey, I don't think this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I've been an interior designer for 17 years now. This is not what I want to do for the rest of my life. I want to be able to take up more space in the world. I want to have larger conversations. I want to work with more people. You know, I want to be able to, I'm seeing the way that what the work I'm doing outside of just my interior design work is changing people's lives, and I want to do more of that. I want to be part of that. So, I went ahead and rebranded like a year and a half into going full time with my business, which meant rebuilding my business, rebuilding brand recognition and building your brand in general, all of these things, rebuilding, building a new website, so on and so forth. Like, it took a lot of a big shift, but I was like, I'd rather do it now than wait a couple of years and it be an even bigger deal, right? So I think the key is to just, to some degree, trust your gut and also kind of be willing to move and change, but also, have mentors and people around you and gather all the information you can and then go with your gut.
Yeah, that's right indeed. Go with that gut indeed. Go with your gut, y'all. That's right indeed. Your gut knows stuff. That's right indeed. It knows more than just food, y'all. It knows lots of stuff. That's right indeed. It helps you with your decision making indeed. That's right indeed. Especially those
Yeah.
remember our long time listeners know about the hut, the heart and the gut when they're both united as one. That's right indeed. Where they can point you in the right direction. That's right indeed.
Yeah.
In this case, north.
Yeah. North. Yep. Exactly.
That's right indeed. And my goodness, 17 years of interior design. That's right indeed. My goodness, didn't know it was that long. That's huge.
Yeah. Long time. Long time. Yeah.
There you go. That's right indeed. Calling herself old lady and whatnot. I'm like, really? 17 years? Really? Sure, it wasn't at the age of 15.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not an old lady. I act like one sometimes. I love to protect my quiet. I love to protect my peace. I can go out and party just like the best of them, but most of the time I'm like in bed at 9. That sounds great. That sounds amazing. Let's do that. Let's do that. Or let's like grab a bottle of wine and go to someone's house or go to dinner early at like 6 and be home in bed by 9. Yeah, I love a good party, but that's not an everyday thing for me. I maybe it's because I spent so much time like as a salsa dancer. I spent 4 years, 5 years, like going out dancing multiple times a week, and the great dancing didn't start till like midnight. So I was out till 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, then getting up at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning for work. Like I did that for years in my mid and late 20s and early 30s. So like, I think it doesn't have the same appeal anymore. It doesn't mean that I don't love to go out, but I also love to stay in. Anyway, that's enough about that.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you, definitely. Definitely indeed. Definitely gonna need that sleep. It makes you easier to have one of those quote unquote miracle mornings indeed. Get to wake
Yeah,
up before everybody else, get your quiet time in and do all that wonderful good stuff to prepare yourself
yeah.
before you take on the world.
Mhm. Yeah, agreed.
That's right indeed. Well, fun question for you. So if your fabulous book, the first of many more to come, Under My Skin, if that book were a food, what would it be and why?
A piece of chocolate cake because because it's a little sweet and it's a little bitter and it's something that you just love and is gone too soon. Yeah.
Ah, there you go. That's right indeed. The magical chocolate cake. That's right indeed. Just a slice. That's right. Try to keep it at the slice, not the whole cake, before the whole cake disappears in the blink of an eye.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it'll really be under your skin.
Right. For sure. For sure.
That's right indeed. That's right indeed. Keeping it cornier than a cornfield, you love to
Yeah.
say. Yes, indeed. So my goodness, coming down to the magical question that every guest gets to receive.
Yay.
That's right, indeed. And that is if you don't wake up tomorrow and you're 25 again, but you're still in the current year. What advice would you give to yourself?
You're going to be okay. It's all going to be okay. And sometimes it's not going to feel okay. And it's okay to let yourself feel not okay and to feel all the things and to be all the things. And definitely don't let anybody tell you who you get to be in this world. Be who you want to be and find the people who see you and forget all the rest.
Oh, that's right, indeed. That's right, indeed. That's right, indeed. You'll be okay, y'all. That's right, indeed. With a big O and a big OK. That's right, indeed. That's right, indeed. Instead of HBK, it'll be the OK.
Yeah.
That's right, indeed. Well, I know folks don't want to just be okay. They want to feel fabulous. To know you help folks do that in their spaces, since you're basically feng shui on steroids. So for those who need to maybe look up for your wonderful interior designer, even better yet, hire to speak so they can hear that wonderful, lovely, calming voice of yours and your story of triumph. What's the best way for folks to do so?
Yeah, best way is to head to my website. It's www.consonate.world. The dot world is important. And you can head there. All my contact information is there. Upcoming workshops around intentional mastering intention, which is about intentional living and intentional leadership. Those I do each one once a month virtually. And then you could reach out to me about as a speaker. But also you can connect with me via TikTok or LinkedIn. Those are the places I'm most active. You can find me on there as Shana Francesca.
Woohoo! Hashtag sensational superstar Shana Francesca, baby. That's right. We're going to put links to all of her wonderful stuff in the show notes, indeed, as she seeks to take over the world and spread the Shana goodness around the globe. That's right, indeed. Perfect interiors. That's right, indeed. You will feel like you have a great exterior, indeed. You'll be able to take on the whole planet, y'all. That's right, indeed. You'll be able to tackle the world. You'll come out of your home after it's all basically fixed, and then you'll be like, man, this is freaking nothing. It's like cashews, almonds, nothing. Nothing can stop me a day, because she's taking over the planet. Oh, that's right, indeed. And she's going to make the podcast host a diplomat of Maui. That's right, indeed. That's all I'm going for is Maui, y'all. That's right. She can have the rest of the planet. That's too much for me. I'll just take Maui. Well, for any more of my wonderful sidebars that lead into rabbit holes appear and turn into camels, any parting words before we close up shop, Shayna?
No, I think I said everything I need to say. Just be you, be curious, be great.
If you're hearing this part of the episode, that means you're one cool individual. Thanks a bunch for tuning in, and if you enjoyed what you heard, be sure to share it with at least one other person in your network. Bonus points for 3. And be sure to check out the backlog too while you're at it, because there are hundreds of wonderful episodes to choose from as well.